The US will ramp up its trade war with China by imposing fresh tariffs, while chip makers were among the biggest losers following a sharp sell-off in New York. While emerging market contagion fears continue to stalk trading floors, US President Donald Trump's protectionist drive returned to the fore following an indication that Japan was next in the firing line, while NAFTA talks with Canada amble along. Japanese stocks led the losses in the region. The Nikkei share average fell 0.8%. with 22,307 after some fluctuation on the Hong Kong market. The Hang Seng Index closed flat at 26,973. And despite all the fears around Trump possibly announcing more import tariffs on Chinese goods, the mainland market closed up in positive territory. The Shanghai Composite Index rose 0.4% to 2,702. To Wall Street now, where the S&P 500 and NASDAQ declined last night as the possibility of more US tariffs on Chinese imports loomed, and as tech stocks tumbled on warnings from chip makers and concerns about increased regulation of social media companies. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 0.08% to end at 25,996 rather. The S&P 500 lost 0.37% at 2,878. While the tech-heavy NASDAQ Composite Index dropped 0.91% to 7,923. Let's find out more about the markets. We're going to go to Arabile Gumedes at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Arabile, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nzinga. Well, it's been an interesting market day. Today's picture looks very negative, around 1/3% down today. But it is the juxtaposition of two mining companies when it comes to earnings, the likes of Northern Platinum and African Rainbow Minerals. We'll talk about those in a moment or two. And a slight recovery as well for the South African Rand, but it is all relative, still above 15 Rand. Let's unpack just how the rest of the European and local markets are faring. Negative across most of Europe and clearly negative here in South Africa as well. Let's find out just exactly what is moving markets and local currencies as well. Warwick Lucas from Galileo Capital joining us as we unpack that. Warwick, thank you so much for the time. I suppose very quickly let's get into a set of earnings news. African Rainbow Minerals doing very well. 51% increase in headline earnings. You take away the once-off change with regards to their coal business, still 20% up. Very, very good business.
Absolutely. I mean, a great set of numbers there. And I mean, it shows how that particular company has been able to harness this weakness that we've seen in the currency in the last little while. I mean, gains in the commodity space have not been big, but they are there. I mean, broadly, commodities have been quietly strong over the last year, and we've seen African Rainbow clearly be able to pick up on that. If we contrast that to the likes of a Northern.
Yeah, who also had their earnings out. Yeah,
absolutely, and their earnings were quite dreadful. And what's interesting to see is that the more focused a company is to the South Africa specific space, the bigger the problem they have. And I think part of that relates to what we see with if you don't use it, you lose it, in terms of mineral rights. And that forces companies to stay investors in shafts and persist in rolling shafts along that they otherwise wouldn't. And you can actually see that it's leading, when you look at the prices of PGM metals, the rarer ones. There's actually a fear coming through there that eventually something's going to break. So what's happening in the big ones like platinum down at $800. I mean, that's horrendous. And you take the rarer ones, rhodium, iridium, ruthenium, all up. Why? Because they are getting stockpiled ahead of fears that these mines are actually just going to close.
Yeah. So African Rainbow Minerals showing then that they are the blueprint perhaps to mining.
Well, absolutely, but also the way that their portfolio is structured. They just fall outside these kind of risks. And I think it's a big heads up to government that the engagement with the industry needs to be restructured.
Yeah. Still within, the equity space as well, I just want to quickly chat about Standard Bank and having been forced off by Nigeria. I know we hadn't discussed this earlier, but Nigerian authorities taking 75 million Rand out of Standard Bank's account, just out of accounting irregularities. Should we be fearful? of delving too much into that Nigerian market now, do you think?
Well, the conduct is curious, and one has to wonder. I think it's important to appreciate in the context of Nigeria that they have elections coming up next year. I have to wonder, though, if they're not in danger of damaging that country as an investment destination. I think they need to be wary, because Nigeria, like South Africa, is actually reliant on external capital flows. I mean, oil is a heavy capex industry, and they need to step carefully now.
Yeah. 15 Rand 14 against the US dollar for the Rand. Some improvement from those 15.50 marks, but still not the place we wanted, surely.
No, absolutely. Look, it's definitely weak. Perhaps it needs to be weak. I mean, we've obviously got, in the wake of that economic data, that GDP data was a shock. And it could very well force Moody's hand quite soon. And I think if Moody's is not to downgrade the rating for South Africa, quite frankly, between government and business, they have to give them something quite soon to not force their hand.
Yeah, but their rating comes on October the 12th, and midterm budget is only on October the 24th or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. Very difficult for you to give them something just after they've made that decision. So they have to make a decision first.
Absolutely. So the only other way to do it is actually give something that leads into the whole framework for the October the 24th. So you need something that really addresses key issues. I mean, with an economy in recession, the key thing that we need now is confidence. And quite frankly, where could that come from? Most likely the land debate, because it's been dominated by, frankly, fringe parties on the far left and the far right. I'm not sure they're actually speaking for the average South African.
Yeah. And perhaps getting involved in that discussion is now very pertinent for the average South African as well.
Very much so.
How do we get there? How do we get to a point where we start engaging ourselves a little bit more in this discussion? Because it's very pertinent that, yes, government come out with a clearer picture very soon, but where do we then stand on it and just hover back and just say, well, let's hope for the best here?
I think the main thing is your framework needs to give a sense of permanence, a sense of continuity. You can't just sort of make it up as you go.
Yeah.
That's how our land policy has to be done going forward.
Indeed. Well, that GDP data, how do we fix that? I mean, do you see the third quarter faring a little bit better? And moving on from that, can we actually fix it and create an uptick beyond 1.5% even?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to look for easy things that can stimulate near-term ready projects. So one example might be a tax break for longer run projects, because there you're giving away something in the future. I mean, since the current state is dire, you might as well give away something in the future. I mean, if that's not what debt is, I don't know. And for example, anything in the building space. I mean, building is in a dire place. It's a big employer. It doesn't require massive levels of skills, except of course in the actual project assimilation phase. So let's try and get those plans out and make sure the lending is in place to get those projects going.
Very quickly, what are we looking out for next week?
Okay, so next week we're looking out for retail sales data. We're looking out for manufacturing production. Hopefully that replicates what we've seen with GDP, that at least is something encouraging that's been stimulated by this weak rand. And we're looking at business confidence. So it's going to be an interesting set next week.
Warwick Lucas, appreciate your time from Galileo Capital, unpacking the market picture. Slightly negative today, but a better rand picture as well. That is where the buck stops for the week. Enjoy your weekend. Nompumelelo and Nzinga joining you right after this. Do stay tuned.